The Israel-Palestine conflict, one of the world's longest-running and most contentious disputes, has its roots in events that took place over a century ago. What began as a colonial decision by a European power has evolved into a complex struggle involving territorial disputes, religious differences, and competing national aspirations. As violence once again erupts in the region, understanding the historical context is crucial to grasping the current situation. Origins of the conflict. The seeds of the conflict were sown in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration, a brief 67-word letter from British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to Lionel Walter Rothschild, a leader in the British Jewish community. This declaration committed the British government to supporting the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. At the time, Palestinian Arabs comprised over 90% of the population in the region. Following World War I, Britain was granted a mandate over Palestine by the League of Nations. During this period, which lasted from 1923 to 1948, the British facilitated large-scale Jewish immigration to Palestine, particularly as many Jews fled persecution in Europe. This demographic shift alarmed the Palestinian Arab population, who saw their lands being confiscated and given to Jewish settlers. Tensions escalate. The Arab Revolt. Mounting tensions led to the Arab Revolt of 1936-1939. Palestinian Arabs launched a general strike, withheld tax payments, and boycotted Jewish products to protest British colonialism and increasing Jewish immigration. The British response was brutal, involving mass arrests, home demolitions, and collaboration with Jewish paramilitary groups. By the revolt's end, thousands of Palestinians had been killed, wounded, or imprisoned. The UN Partition Plan and the Nakba. As British control waned, the United Nations proposed a partition plan in 1947 to divide Palestine into separate Arab and Jewish states. Despite Jews comprising only 33% of the population and owning just 6% of the land, the plan allocated about 55% of Palestine to the proposed Jewish state. Palestinians, who owned 94% of historic Palestine and made up 67% of its population, rejected this plan as unfair. Before the British mandate officially ended, Zionist paramilitary groups began military operations to expand the borders of their future state. This campaign, known to Palestinians as the Nakba or catastrophe, resulted in the destruction of over 500 Palestinian villages, towns, and cities between 1947 and 1949. An estimated 750,000 Palestinians were forcibly displaced, and about 15,000 were killed in numerous massacres. On May 15, 1948, Israel declared its independence, having captured 78% of historic Palestine. The following day, neighboring Arab states intervened, leading to the First Arab-Israeli War. When fighting ended in 1949, the remaining 22% of Palestine was divided into the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Occupation and further displacement. The Six-Day War of 1967 marked another turning point. Israel occupied the rest of historic Palestine, including the Gaza Strip, West Bank, and East Jerusalem, as well as the Syrian Golan Heights and Egyptian Sinai Peninsula. This led to further Palestinian displacement, referred to as the Nakba or setback. In the wake of the 1967 war, Israel began constructing settlements in the occupied territories. These settlements, considered illegal under international law, have steadily expanded over the decades. Today, over 700,000 Israeli settlers live in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem, compared to just 110,000 at the time of the Oslo Accords in 1993. Popular resistance, the First and Second Intifadas. Palestinian frustration with the occupation erupted in the First Intifada in 1987. This uprising, characterized by civil disobedience, strikes, and stone-throwing youths confronting Israeli tanks, brought international attention to the Palestinian cause. It also saw the emergence of Hamas, an Islamist group that engaged in armed resistance against Israel. The Oslo Accords of 1993 seemed to offer hope for peace, establishing the Palestinian Authority, PA, with limited self-rule in parts of the West Bank and Gaza. However, the fundamental issues of borders, Jerusalem, refugees, and settlements remained unresolved. The Second Intifada broke out in 2000 following a provocative visit by Israeli politician Ariel Sharon to the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. This uprising was more violent than the first, with Israel reoccupying PA-controlled areas and beginning construction of a separation wall that further fragmented Palestinian territory. Gaza, blockade and repeated conflicts. In 2005, Israel withdrew its settlements from the Gaza Strip. However, Following Hamas's victory in the 2006 Palestinian elections and subsequent takeover of Gaza, Israel imposed a stringent blockade on the territory in 2007. This blockade, which severely restricts the movement of people and goods, has had devastating humanitarian consequences. Since 2008, Israel has launched 4 major military operations against Gaza in 2008, 2012, 2014, and 2021. These assaults have resulted in thousands of Palestinian deaths, including many children, and widespread destruction of homes and infrastructure. The blockade has made rebuilding extremely difficult, contributing to a dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. Current situation and recent escalation. The conflict has entered a new phase of violence with Hamas's unprecedented attack on southern Israel on October 7, 2024, killing over 800 Israelis. In response, Israel declared war on Gaza, launching a bombing campaign that has killed hundreds of Palestinians and threatening a ground invasion. Israel has also announced a total blockade of Gaza, cutting off supplies of food, fuel, and other essential commodities. This action, which amounts to collective punishment of Gaza's civilian population, is considered a war crime under international law. The recent escalation occurs against a backdrop of increasing violence in the occupied West Bank. According to the UN, more than 550 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since October 7, 2023. Settler violence has also surged, with over 1,000 attacks documented in the same period. Humanitarian crisis and international response. The humanitarian situation in Gaza, already dire due to years of blockade and repeated conflicts, is now reaching catastrophic levels. The UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, reports that its facilities, including schools housing displaced civilians, have been hit by Israeli strikes. International mediators, including the United States, are pushing for a ceasefire plan. However, the lack of clear commitment from Israel's leadership and the complexities of the conflict make achieving a lasting peace agreement challenging. The conflict continues to expose divisions in the international community. While many nations call for an immediate ceasefire and adherence to international law, others, notably the United States, have been criticized for the continued support of Israel despite mounting civilian casualties in Gaza. Looking ahead, as the death toll rises and the humanitarian crisis deepens, the need for a just and lasting solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict becomes ever more urgent. However, the core issues that have fueled the conflict for decades, including the status of Jerusalem, the right of return for Palestinian refugees, the expansion of Israeli settlements, and the blockade of Gaza, remain unresolved. Any path to peace will require addressing these fundamental issues, as well as acknowledging the historical injustices that have shaped the conflict. It will also necessitate a commitment from both sides, and the international community, to uphold international law and protect civilian lives. As the world watches the latest chapter in this long-running conflict unfold, the hope for a peaceful resolution seems distant. Yet, for the millions of Israelis and Palestinians who have lived through decades of violence and insecurity, finding a way to coexist peacefully remains an imperative. The challenge now is to move beyond the cycle of violence and retribution towards a future where both peoples can live with dignity, security, and self-determination.